right, guys, we're back again with Rod Giltack of the CCFR. This is video number 2. Go check out the first one if you haven't seen it yet. Today, we're going to learn how we develop the motor skills that we're going to need to do this kind of stuff. Rod, what are we going to be learning today?
We're going to be talking about a training concept that I call intellectual bandwidth. And it's a critically important thing to understand. And it's also the reason why we do certain things during drills. So we talked, I think, a little bit in the last video about how important it is. We know the reason for the drills that we're doing. We know the reason for some of the actions that we're doing while we're doing these drills.
It's one of those things, anytime you're learning a new skill, myself personally, I think I was a little naive when I first started getting into firearms that I would just immediately able to jump in there and be John Wick. Well, not exactly, but I think especially when under a lot of stress, there's so many things to know. So I think what you're going to be talking about, if I'm not mistaken, is having to layer that understanding of things, layer those motor skills, develop those motor skills, and broaden that bandwidth. But you have a better way of explaining it, so maybe you can tell us a bit more about this intellectual bandwidth concept.
All right, so most people can only run so many concurrent tasks at the same time. And it's just like bandwidth, just like your internet, right? You have so much bandwidth, you can only run so much data across that wire. Now, when you're operating a firearm, different tasks are going to take different priority in your mind. So safety is the most important thing, because if you're out shooting, you have an object that propels a projectile, and that projectile is going to go through whatever's in its way, right? So what happens is when people first start shooting, 70%, let's say, in the total bandwidth that they're capable of as an individual is taken up with safety. And where you're going to see this concept in action is typically with beginners. When you have a beginner who learns how to point their firearm, keep their finger off the trigger, fire when the fire command or threat command is made, and safely put their firearm back on safety and bring it down, that takes up a big chunk of their bandwidth. As you develop these skills and they become innate, they become instinctive, those tasks require less and less of that bandwidth. And then now you can start thinking about other things like, well, should I be standing here? Should I be over there? Maybe I should take a knee right now. Oh, maybe I have a malfunction. And you'll be able to run all these tasks in concurrence. But unless you work all these individual skills, you'll never get to that point. You'll just continue to be clumsy. And that's the difference between someone who has all of their body movement skills innate, right? They occupy a very tiny part of their bandwidth, and that leaves a whole lot more for everything else. So that's the idea.
So the more and more you train the basics, the more hardwired it gets, and the more reflexive it gets, and that frees up more higher level thought process for the more intricate things that you might have to, the randomized elements of the situation.
Yeah, for most people, they have so much bandwidth available, that doesn't really change. It's how much bandwidth is occupied by a certain task. That's why we're going to train, and as you're going to see together, we're going to start with simple drills, then we're going to add more stuff in. We're going to add target identification, we're going to add movement, we're going to add scanning and breathing after each shot. We're going to be running the safety each time. We're going to just keep adding and adding and adding to the point where you have enough tasks to deal with. But when we do that slowly, those skills are going to become innate and they're not going to occupy that bandwidth. And so by the end, hopefully, you're moving, shooting, you have safety in the forefront of your mind, you're shooting the right targets, the correct amount of times, you're scanning, you're breathing, you're doing all the things that you need to do to get to the point where you're confident enough to stand on a line with a variety of other people in a course and take your training to the next level.
Could you elaborate on this concept of intellectual bandwidth and how it pertains to real world situations?
In real life, the way that the intellectual bandwidth principle manifests itself is if you're dealing with beginners. And so now you've taught someone how to safely discharge a rifle, you've taught someone how to change a magazine, you've taught someone how to check for a malfunction or what have you, and you make them walk forward slowly. And their job is just to fire at a target as per a command and to keep the same cadence in their step. So what we see with beginners is we'll see a change in the cadence of their steps when a magazine goes empty, let's say, when their gun goes empty, or they'll stop walking entirely and they need to be prompted to keep walking. And so what that means to us is, as you're a beginner, before you've received all this training, the amount of data that's concerned with just literally walking forward and firing a gun and reloading it if necessary, just those things alone is enough for people that can't actually run all those concurrent tasks together. So that's how you see that in real life.
And it's almost like when you get overloaded with information, it's not like you perform certain parts of it well. Everything kind of just collapses. Everything just crashes. It's like a system that, like a computer that just, you don't have enough RAM. It just won't work. And that's what I found when I was doing that, is it wasn't just a diminishing, performance in any one of those particular things. It was just, system crash, So all the more importance of running those basic drills so that it becomes rote and there is and you free up more of that bandwidth. And I was actually surprised with myself how quickly, not to toot my own horn here, but I did notice myself developing throughout the day. So it wasn't like this is going to take years to master these things. Like, I think a lot of them, these layers could be developed, with if you're persistently training, it probably wouldn't take too long. Obviously there's, the whole suite of things put together would take years, but some of the basics, like just, the breathing part, the scanning, the reloading, how you're positioning the firearm, getting in the habit of toggling the safety and keeping your finger out of the trigger guard, muzzle direction. Like, these things I think are pretty achievable in a shorter period of time, but the things I would really struggle with would be, putting the whole thing together.
Well, as you said, you improved dramatically throughout the day. I mean, we still had a few hiccups here and there, but I mean, It was only a day. It wasn't even 8 hours. But I think if you were very committed to it and you said, okay, you know what, I really need to get from A to B, how fast could I do it? If you did maybe 4 hours a day, maybe twice a week in a month, and you were training with someone that was giving you that external stimulus, like, that's one of the most important parts, is if you have someone that's training with you, shouting those commands so that you're not just saying, well, I'm going to do this next, because that's not how it works in the real world. It's some external stimulus. I think if you trained twice a week, 4 hours per, in a month, you'd actually have a lot of those skills become innate, and they wouldn't occupy such a great part of that intellectual bandwidth that you have available.
So what you're referring to essentially is muscle memory, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
So the skills that become innate to, they're just little side threads that are running while you're doing everything else, leaving that big gap for all the things that you have to be creative about.
Going back to our reference in the first video, Daniel's son, when he's being told to wax on, wax off, he didn't really understand why he was doing that at the start, but what he was doing was getting those main patterns hardwired so he didn't have to think later on, and that could free up more bandwidth for other things.
Exactly.
So there was a method to Mr. Miyagi's madness.
He was mad and methodical.
There you go. You got to be a little bit of both. All right, guys, let me know in the comment section below, when you were first starting to shoot, or maybe you haven't shot yet, maybe you're just learning a new skill, was there a sticking point for you, or can you relate to this intellectual bandwidth concept? And make sure you come back for part 3 of this series. What are we going to be talking about in part 3?
We're going to talk about performance stress management and stress responses. And it's very important for you to understand that concept because, again, that's what's behind all the different aspects of the drills that we're doing. So again, you got to know why you're doing something.
Absolutely, and it's even if you do have all of these skills, even if you have the motor patterns hardwired, you're going to be put in a situation where you're very stressed, and so the ability to effectively execute in those types of conditions is pretty much the most important thing. You could have the person with the most amount of skills, but if they can't manage stress in a bad situation, then it's all for naught. But the more you can have those skills hardwired, the easier it's going to be to function, I presume.
Well, and we're going to induce as much stress as we possibly can here at the range.
Yeah. All right, so make sure you come back for part 3. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.